Well, you had the contract has got the 1 year blowout.
Hi, and welcome to the Upside. I'm Paul Santinello, your host for the program. We talk about all the great things that are going on in Long Meadow. Today, we're going to talk about something that I hope people will think is a great thing. It's a long-term plan for our town. We're going to talk about a vision for Long Meadow. And joining me today is Richard Foster, who's on the select board with me, and Richard's also former chairman of the capital planning committee, and Mark Barouski, and Mark is on our audit committee. He's been on the capital planning committee, he's been on the finance committee and the select board, so he understands the needs that we're going to be talking about here in town. So we're going to start with what the vision is and what it isn't. It is a concept, and it's a concept of, if you take a look at all the projects that we have on our annual town meeting warrant coming up in May, if you take a look at all the projects that are in the longer range capital plan and the things that need to be addressed in town, this is just a concept of how do you connect all these dots and still make it feasible to pay for. Because if we're still going to do these things over time, this is really looking at an action plan of how to generate some revenue and cost savings that can help pay for some of this. What it is not is a select board proposal. This is something that I've developed. Rich Foster has been helping me with this in details. Hopefully come in the April 7th meeting, I'm hoping we're going to be on the agenda to talk about this and present it to the board. But what you need to know is right now there's over $2 million worth of items that this plan addresses that will be on capital, on the capital or the town meeting warrant, either through capital, CPA funding, or just general fund funding. So what we're going to start with, and I want to thank Mark and Rich for being here. There was a long-range plan that was started in 2004. There was an executive order from the state. The committee was formed of probably about 15 people or so. Here's some of the names that were on it. Some of the names you might recognize. Some of the people are still active in government. Basically, this committee was charged with developing what's called the Long Meadow Long Range Plan. And what it did was highlight opportunities for expansion in town. There's some interesting things. It's a 122-page document, very well thought out. There was about $60,000 to $70,000 worth of consultants that came into this to help develop the plan. And it really talked about the long-term plan of Long Meadow. We've done the low-hanging fruit on this plan, but there's a lot that was left to be done, and it's been sitting on a shelf for about 8 years or so. If you look at this particular map now that you can see on the screen, and this map in the red is highlighted the different parcels of land that we're talking about. And it's a multi-purpose, a multi-tiered plan, in a sense, where if you start one, it sets the stage for other plans or other parcels as we go. It entails all these. So basically, the first step would be, the town owns some piece of land called the water tower property, and we'll go into detail what that is. It's to take the water tower property and develop into new athletic fields, and put in a comfort station / concession stand that would raise revenue for the associations that are using it. But it would allow us to expand park and rec fields for lacrosse and soccer specifically, but also help alleviate field space for the ultimate frisbee folks that are there as well. Develop part of the Wolf Swamp fields, and it would help free up some space at Wolf Swamp, which would let us develop a new DPW facility. And we'll get all these points we're going to talk about today. We're going to get into specifics in each one of them. It would repurpose Grand Meadows, the tennis facility on Dwight Road, into a town-owned and operated multi-sport facility that we can use for tennis and other sports inside another area of the facility. It would repurpose the Blinn tennis courts that are in the center of town right now into commercial property, and we'll talk about that and the benefits of that. It also looks at a new middle school, or a combination of the middle schools due to population shifts and so forth. This plan also takes a look at repurposing of Glenbrook Middle School for what I've labeled a community / adult center, and the repurpose of the Greenwood Adult Center, if it moves out of there, to be the housing for town offices. You know, what we have in Town Hall, the basement of the community house could all be consolidated to deliver services better to our residents. And lastly, you would take a look at the land around Town Hall and the community house and what's called the Cordis property, because those lands are directly connected now and offers the ability to potentially do some sort of development. The current programs that are on the agenda, on the long-term, short-term agenda, offer no potential for revenue. None of that has ever been discussed at select board meetings, capital meetings, and so forth about if we do X, what would Y look like. There's no initiatives for streamlining operational issues. Everything will still be spread out. We'll still be in a similar situation to where we are now. Money will be expended, what we call the status quo projects. Nothing changes. We're just going to continue dumping money. Blinn tennis courts is a great example. We've probably spent already between $250,000 and $700,000 in repurposing or resurfacing rather those particular courts, and now we're expected to spend somewhere around $700,000 to remove everything, rebuild, put new fencing up, new lights, and so forth. There's no initiatives for energy efficiencies. One of the things we're going to talk about is what would happen to the potential to happen to the DPW facility. And these are Band-Aid approaches. These are things that we're patching, and eventually we're going to rebuild or have to put big money into it at some point in time. And we have technical difficulties, so we can restart, close, and everything. So I'm going to ask Mr. Barouski, and I asked Mark to be here because he's been involved in the community for so long and on the committees that actually do a lot of this capital plan, and now he's on the audit committee. One of the things you had talked about when you were on the finance committee, I comically called Mark Meadow, and it was really saying if you had to build a town new, what would it look like? And even though you might not have thought about this, these were some of the things that you were addressing of what were your needs, what did you need versus what you had kind of thing. Is that right? Or
Well, it's part of it, but the other part of it was to prioritize where funding should be going. And certainly, I think that in addition to reviewing this plan should be reviewed in concert with the overall capital projects in town so that we can develop a financial plan to address these issues in a situation where the town can afford to do it.
right.
And to just keep compounding and I mean, how much can people really take financially? We now have, I saw a report the other day where we are now the highest mill rate in the state of Massachusetts. I mean, that's a situation that we should not be proud of. And the question is, how do we economically address these issues, roll in some revenue generation by doing this, and at the same time deal with all the capital projects that Richard is probably most knowledgeable about. And to me, the whole program everything should be looked at one time and prioritized as to where the money is directed.
Right, and what we've done over the years, obviously, is we've had the tunnel vision of saying, this is now the priority, or this is now the priority, and we keep pumping money in with no plan, so to speak.
And a perfect example of that is what happened at the high school over the years prior to the building of this new school. We replaced doors, we replaced windows, we spent $1 million on a roof, and then shortly after that, we raised the building.
Yeah.
So how much burning of money do we want to do? You know, spending money like a drunken sailor just doesn't accomplish it without a plan.
Right.
And certainly if a new high school had come to the forefront, and I'm just talking a matter of a few years, you know, I'm not talking about a long period of time. I think the roof was put on, 5 or 6 years before we raised the building.
Yep.
I mean, it's just an insane waste of money.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at this plan, and like you talk about the revamping or the redoing of the Blinn tennis courts, and if there's if in fact the overall plan would be to move those courts to another location and utilize that space for a revenue generating location, then why do we want to pour more money into that existing property?
And that's my point, is that when we're making decisions, and by the way, when you talk about the mill rate, what Mark is saying, that we are maxed out at $25 per thousand, and we're getting close. And I actually asked the CFO to explain that to the board and the public before we talked about our budget. And we still use the credit card on the budget this year. But the issue is there is no plan. There is no thought going out to it. And as I said, this is an idea. I'm not saying this is what it would look like. I'm not saying this is what has to be adopted. What I'm saying is all of a sudden the dots got connected and this started to make sense in the sense of how do you do it? How do you generate some revenue to help pay for it? So it's not all on the backs of the taxpayers. And the issue is, just like I pointed out in the bullet points, if we don't have some sort of plan like this, it will be all on the backs of the residents. And the difference is that when you're putting together something like this, the way I look at it is one of the things I'm going to be asking the select board for is to name a steering committee, which would look at this. And the way I see this is they're going to come in and say, that's great, but we could actually do this over here. And those are the kind of ideas that you want to say, how do you, and that might then generate, well, if you can do A, you might be able to do B, C, D, and E that I haven't thought of yet, or that we haven't looked at in putting this together. And that opens up the door to say, okay, let's put all of these needs down on a piece of paper. And if we do A, does that help us do B, C, and D? And if not, then you move on. But this is the first piece of property. The town owns off of Academy Drive. It's called the Water Tower property. It just happens to be where the water tower is. Topographically, this is what it looks like. In the far bottom right-hand corner, that little white dot is the water tower. There is approximately 20.1 acres here. The green lines you see on the map, this is what it just looks like on a plot graph. The green lines are water and sewer connectors, so it has access to water and sewer that we can, and I'm sure we can well it to put irrigation in, so we can actually have fields that are dedicated to the sports that are going to be played there. It is 2 acres bigger than what is currently at Wolf Swamp. So the total plan, when we look at Wolf Swamp next, this would, keeping part of Wolf Swamp, adding this, will increase park and rec space by 14 acres, which is huge. There's centrally located fields. We have the ability to put in fields that can be better maintained. If you've ever coached, played, or walked on Wolf Swamp fields, if it wasn't for weeds, it'd be dirt. So this actually puts in safer play conditions for the athletes that are out there. It would develop a concession stand. There's some revenue there. If you go to other facilities in other towns, they actually have great concession stands that generate revenue, whether it's 8 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock at night. There's definitely a need for more space. That's why there's a $35,000 article on this year's town warrant to dig up 2 fields at Wolf Swamp that are softball-sized baseball fields, little league fields, and plant grass seed so that they can put more soccer and lacrosse fields in. And it definitely is Superior Field. Yes, sir.
Richard, if you could just back up to the map one more time. The access to those 2 pieces of property off of Frank Smith, it's actually a dirt road that goes between Frank Smith and Academy Drive.
Yep.
And the advantage of utilizing that property, whereas on the Wolf Swamp fields now, you got people who are actually backing into traffic. Correct. Onto Wolf Swamp to ongoing traffic. This is a much a safer situation where the egress actually is down almost a private road going to Frank Smith or Academy Drive. So I think it's in that regard, it's a much better location.
Yeah, and actually that's a great point, because that was one of the proposals 2 years ago, or a year ago, to the select board, is they wanted to put up guardrails at Wolf Swamp for exactly that, for safety purposes. And this year, ironically, they're not on that warrant. So then what that would do is it would free up acreage at the Wolf Swamp fields. And we would create a new DPW complex down there. On this map here, you see there's a red line almost down the middle. The fields to the left, you can see an outline of baseball fields that would encompass the size to put in 3 or 4, keep 3 or 4 baseball fields there, even with some parking that would need to be made. And DPW would be placed over to the far right. And if you go to the next one, you can see it a lot more clearly. Right where the arrow is to the far right is where DPW we believe you could site the facility itself to keep it away from public view. You can put trees and plantings to obscure the view a little bit. It would carve out 6 acres for DPW, leave 12 acres for the fields, and that's where you get the 14-acre increase over the current field usage. It takes DPW out of the floodplain. It gives multiple access points for DPW to our community, where they have essentially one right now. We don't have to purchase property to move the DPW facility, because that's something that's been on the agenda as well. The DPW facility where it stands right now can be converted as an option, as a thought, into a solar voltaic farm with solar panels on it. A proposal 4 years ago on a 4-acre plot we have in town would have generated $240,000 in revenue, or energy savings, however you want to look at it. This parcel is 50% bigger. So I'm saying if you leave at least 250 in and don't go any larger dollar-wise, but this is 50% bigger than that previous facility that we were looking at, with a closer connection point to the grid. So that's one of the revenue enhancers that we're talking about. Is that's the way that you help pay for some of these projects. And if we don't convert into a solar farm, there's other options that we could use it for. Yes, sir.
You might want to make note that there's different avenues in order to produce the solar voltaic farm. Either the town takes it on themselves financially to build the farm, or bringing in a contractor who in fact would do it themselves and then pay a fee to the town to do it. So in point of fact, it could be done at no cost to us and still generate revenue.
Correct. And that's another great point that I've missed in here too. So, see, and again, this is when we talk about the plan and rolling the plan out. Those are the kind of things exactly the kind of things I want to hear. Someone thinking about something that I haven't thought of, or Rich might not have thought of. The next one, which is a little bit more fun in my eyes, but in the sense of what it could do, is the town could take ownership of Grand Meadows Tennis Facility. That's right off of Dwight Road, opposite Franconia Country Club. That's what the footprint looks like topographically. It's a big space. It's 10 acres, 10.7 acres. 2/3 of the building houses 8 tennis courts with facilities. There's a concession stand in there. I was told there was a bar on the second floor at one point in time in our community. With a full liquor license at that time, Mark. The right-hand side of that, right about where the circle is, where it says 4, that was burnt out. There's a tarp over the roof. And that section, just doing some imagining, is that could potentially be a turfed indoor field that could be rented out. And if you rent it out on just a simple number of $60 an hour, 3 nights a week, or 3 hours a night for 6 nights a week, you will generate more revenue than what the facility pays in property taxes. So what it can do for our community is have year-round tennis play for people versus what we're going to do, what you do at Blint courts or the clay courts, you have 6-8 months out of the year. We can expand fee services, free programming. Park and Rec can literally have year-round camps for their athletic programs that they run in the summertime. So right now they run field hockey, soccer, lacrosse camps all during the summer. They're subject to the conditions outside, whether it's like last year I know they were doing them in 95-degree heat. Other years they've done them in rain, so that they go on one way or the other. Possibly consolidating some of the Park and Rec services because you have that facility. And it just allows for growth of recreational facilities. There's just a lot of things that you can do. You have high school teams right now because of the weather going to indoor facilities and places, renting it out for just to practice right now because they can't get on the fields. This might help alleviate some of that in those extreme weather conditions. The next thing would be, because if you're offering the Grand Meadows as year-round tennis play, would be to repurpose the Blint courts to commercial property. This is the topographical point of it, and what you need to look at here is the properties to the left and right of that is the shops where People's Bank is, the Hookula on the other side. The other directly across the street is the shops. This parcel of land is bigger than the Big Y footprint. It is about half the size of what you could put in the shops, you could put in that footprint there. By just rough estimation, that type of commercial development could generate somewhere around $150,000 a year to the town. In addition to that, it's probably the most highly demanded piece of property in town. Like I said, new tax revenue, it saves putting that money into the Blint courts, redoing them. There's also the possibility of moving those courts and taking a look at potentially housing them at Bliss Park, where you have the clay courts. And if we're gonna put in new courts, new lighting, and again, we need to think outside of the box. You can repurpose these over to Bliss Park, where you can also offer lighting over on the clay courts. So you can play clay courts at night, not just the regular tennis courts. And then we can determine, do we need 12? Is it 8's the right number, 10? And I don't know what that is. The only reason why we're going to replace 12 courts is because we have 12 there. We've never looked at what the need might be. Someone mentioned that tournaments go there because there's 12 courts. I get it. The existing property doesn't generate any tax revenue, and it's actually going to take $750,000 worth of tax dollars to fix it up, and that's the estimates we have today. And one of the things, I understand that it's CPA funding, and the kick I got at a CPA funding is people tend to think it's free money. 3/4 of the CPA funding comes from Long Meadow taxpayers. The other 25% comes from the state. So that money going to Blinn tennis courts, even though it's under the auspices of CPA, is 3/4 of that money is coming out of your pocket when you pay your property taxes, and 25% is just coming back from the state. And the courts stay idle in the winter. Again, the Blinn, the Grand Meadows facility would offer year-round plays and give an expansion of services to those folks. Yep.
Can I just interject?
Yep.
I just want to drive home your figure of $750,000 to redo to redo the existing courts, and the fact that we could save 750 and build the courts someplace else, probably for almost the same kind of cost, just seems to make more sense, and then utilize that same space for a revenue generation.
Yeah, and to your point of what you were talking about earlier about not thinking ahead, we've probably put we put minimally 250,000 and probably close to 700,000 of resurfacing those courts over the years. And now we're going to tear, and I understand they got cracks in them here and there, and now we're going to take that money that we put into the courts, like we did at the windows and so forth, and tear it all up and spend another 700,000 plus.
Right.
And by the time it gets said and done, I don't know what the final cost would be, but now you're talking those courts have probably generated about $1.5 million bill to the residents.
And the CPC money can be utilized for doing it at the Bliss Park, because it goes under it's under their purview.
Right, and it would also increase services if we then tied into clay courts, for example,
Right.
under the lights, that people have more opportunity. And one thing with this, before we go on to the next slide, is what my goal with this is really to get people to stop looking at Long Meadow like this and saying, I want mine. You have to have a mindset to believe in this and say, this is for the betterment of the town, not for the betterment of my tennis court, for the betterment of my soccer field. It's for this is, in my opinion, this type of idea is a win for everybody. It hits almost every demographic somewhere here in town, from old to young. So the next part of this.
Well, the downside on your upside here is
That's
that
why you're here.
is that change is hard.
I understand that.
And so I think people are generally reluctant for change.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most difficult part about presenting a plan like this, is because there's so much change involved.
Yeah. And Mark, I think that's exactly why the long-range plan went on a shelf. Because if you see some of the content of that, you say, wow, the people were really thinking about revenue for the town. They were thinking about how to bring in and make it more affordable to live in town. It really was well thought out. And this piece of land, someone said, well, gee, I've been playing tennis there for 35 years, and you don't want to change that. And the way I look at it is, if we didn't change anything in town, we'd be sitting on sand dunes right now, not a new high school. So it does. You're right. Change is the hardest thing, and I know that's the hardest thing with this, is saying this is the way I've done it for my time in town. I don't want it to change, but that's how we end up where we are, spending millions and millions of dollars on the same projects. It seems like every year. So the next part of this is due to demographics and due to the fact that the school department made a decision more than a few years ago to move 5th grade from the middle schools back to the elementary schools. It looks like there might not be a need to have 2 separate facilities for middle school education. And I know the schools have a middle school working group that they've reformulated and reconstituted. We had statements of interest for a few years about middle schools. And I want to utter a caveat, which is, for this to happen, there would have to be a separately appointed school building committee who would submit, the town would submit the statement of interest to the SBC, School Building Authority, MSBA rather, and then a school building committee would be formulated, and they would look at these 2 properties, the Glenbrook and Williams Middle School properties, and determine where do we want to put it, how does it go. We chose one, because you can only have one site for a new school if we're thinking through my process here. So we chose that the new school would be at Williams Middle School, for example. It's an 18-acre parcel. It obviously has a lot of room for them to, if they had to add on or do whatever they need to do in the middle school. But what it would do, if there was one, is it would consolidate it with Glenbrook Middle School. It would consolidate students and teachers. There's a difference in class sizes between the two schools. It would actually make it a little bit more uniform across the board for the middle school population. It would definitely have a reduction of costs in the operational budget for the school department. It could have a potential reduction in costs. In essence, for example, you might not need two principals, obviously, and things like that. But the boilers, the custodial, and so forth might offer some opportunities of reductions of tax dollars. It also would unite the student body 3 years earlier before they go to the high school. I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's many more staff development opportunities by having everybody in one building, delivering the same message. And again, as I mentioned, it will deliver better class or balanced class sizes for the student population. What that would do, though, is it would free up Glenbrook Middle School.
And historically, Paul, when you were in diapers and I was going to the Williams Middle School,
Okay.
that was the only middle school in town. That was it.
Okay.
And the class sizes now are about the same as when I attended here. So and the good thing about Williams Middle School, it's more centrally located than Glenbrook.
Right. And it's if you look at this, and we have to keep having technical difficulties, but if you look at it, and I mean, part of this is demographics, right? Student population's down, but because the school department moved fifth grade back, it really makes it more feasible to look at one middle school again. Versus two. And I think everybody's looking at how do you reduce the cost of operating government, and this is one of the ways to do it. If you look at the parcel of Glenbrook, it could be repurposed to a new community/adult center. It would in essence, you would move out the Council on Aging from Greenwood Center and potentially put it here. It's 20 acres of land on this site. The other potential for this is that there's the potential for, well, let me go backwards. This building is handicap accessible at two different locations, the Glenbrook Middle School, but it also would allow for the potential, a potential type of development for perhaps 55 plus housing. For people who are empty nesters who say, I pay a lot in property taxes, what do I get for it? It might be a way to downsize and keep them in Long Meadow, so to speak. Again, that's just a thought. This would be something looked at by the steering committee, but it allows for expansion of services for our aging population. Right now, there's another warrant on the town meeting floor for $35,000 for a study of a new senior center. It's in the programs offered there. So this stuff, again, is already on the board. It's something that we're looking at. There's a revenue enhancement opportunity. Again, tax revenue if you have a 55 plus housing condo. I don't see, in my idea, I don't see the town as the developer. I see the town as saying, this is something we want. And again, I might be totally wrong on that. But it leads the need to construct a new facility for Council on Aging. It also allows us to do more. If we keep the gym and we keep the auditorium, we don't hamper the basketball programs that use it in the wintertime. The auditorium affords the Council on Aging and community groups to use the auditorium for plays and so forth. There's definitely a larger kitchen and dining area than what currently sits at Greenwood. And you might have heard during some of the budget discussion about how many meals we serve per year. And there's a demand on space up there for kitchen and dining space. And again, it might provide alternative housing options for our senior community as we age. Something we could look at. What it would then do is it would allow us to repurpose Greenwood for new municipal offices. And it puts it on a main road that's easy to find. That's the footprint of Greenwood, just the driveway and the building. Over to the left is all the land that's there. That's the two baseball fields, a little park, the tennis courts, the pool. So that's the 4.1 acre parcel of land is just the building itself. We've put in roughly $200,000 to $300,000 already in Greenwood improvements. On the warrant again are other potential items for that facility. It would allow us to consolidate services. It would allow us to bring our staff together. Right now, they're in the basement of the community house, the first floor of the community house, and town hall. And this allows it to come into one spot for more efficient delivery of service, better access for us, the town residents, to go in if you had to go do business with Park and Rec and the treasurer collector. Again, another thing is that will be on the capital plan, or is, a reconstruction inside of the town hall to divide up the treasurer and collector's office space from the town clerk's office space. There's also on the warrant CPA money to do more work at the community house. And again, another facility where we've put hundreds of thousands of dollars into it and continue to put more money into it. It allows for better off-street parking. There's the potential you move the elections from the community house to the new community center, for example, or even the gymnasium up here at the Greenwood Center, which would alleviate the stress that you have during presidential and gubernatorial races on the area around the community house as school gets out and so forth. And it is the ideal location because of the work that we're putting in for a secondary emergency operations center. Right now, the fire station is that place, that facility. If something were to happen to this building, this would give us an ideal second location where they can move in readily and take care of the business of the town during some sort of emergency.
Additionally, there's been, over the years, there's been a lot of discussion about the need to make the community house and town hall handicapped accessible, which has always been problematic. Mm-hmm. And this building is already handicapped accessible, right. So it accomplishes that issue at the same time.
Excellent.
So it eliminates those costs too.
Yep, that's a great point. And then what it does is you take the last part of the puzzle is you could take a look at the community house, at town hall, the potential. Last year there was talk of the Cordis property that directly abuts that land. And it offers the ability to say, is there something we can do with it? That's the part I'm open. I don't know what that would look like, if you would combine the two buildings, if you would rent one out, sell one, and that type of thing. But it definitely gives the opportunity. That's a very desirable location for any business to be or any organization. But it gives the ability to look at those two facilities. There was a study done in town probably about 8 or 9 years ago called the JCJ report. And the JCJ report was looking at things just like this. Are these buildings, do we need these buildings? And if you look at, town hall is operable. It's not optimal operations. It's limited because it is not fully handicap accessible. We no longer have an office on the third floor, which houses the separate IT department. So the third floor is completely blank. The second floor is inaccessible. We spent, I think, $75,000 to make the bathroom on the first floor handicap accessible. Again, because we weren't looking out a little bit longer term at things like this. But if you look at the operations of town hall, it's split, and that's not good business in the short term and the long term when you have part of your staff across the street for finance and you're over here. And again, it's easy to walk to in between, but it's probably not the most efficient use of it. But again, it'll give us the impacts that allow us to rent those facilities, sell them, whatever it is that you would do. But that's what I would look for a steering committee to do. And it definitely improves level of services for the community to have it in one central location. So where do we go from here? When I do present this to the select board, what I'm going to ask for three things, three action steps. One of which we're supposedly done already, which was to look at the water tower property and what type. The water tower property was put under the auspices of Park and Rec and School Committee at a town meeting through a bylaw change. So one of the things that we're going to look at is we directed the town manager to find out through our town attorney, how do you change that bylaw to put it back under town control for potential development? So that's even before we start talking about this. Secondly, we would need to look at the same issues at the Wolf Swamp Fields. The long-range plan actually was going to put garden apartments. That was their recommendation. I forgot how many garden apartments it was. They didn't do it for three reasons. One is you need a bylaw change. Again, that's not really a big deal. You need an act of the legislature for repurposing the land. Again, that's not a big issue, but the most important reason why they didn't do it is it would take away field space. And we answer that with this proposal here. It's just an idea of it. So that would be another thing to look at. What's the bylaw and act of the legislature we need to be? And finally, to form a steering committee. And my vision of the steering committee and what I would relate to the select board, it would be a committee of people who are in the business community, who understand these types of developments, would ask the questions of what would happen if you moved A to B and C to D, and how does that affect, what else can you encompass in it? And as I said when I did this presentation for the public earlier this week, is one of the things we missed the boat with this high school. I know there was potential for a senior center that they were in talks with at one point, but perhaps there could have been a second floor right here where we are right now that housed the town administration. And we didn't think that far ahead. We didn't think that we could have consolidated the community house and town hall already with this building by adding a second floor. So that's what I would like a steering committee to do. Find out if it's feasible to even begin to look at the projects. So not stop what you already have on the hopper for the town hall or town meeting, but just say, hold them in abeyance to see if this is even feasible. What would the potential costs would be? What would be the financing possibilities? What would the potential income be? And then bring that back to the select board. So it would be a steering committee appointed by the select board, answering to the select board, saying, yes, this kind of makes sense, let's explore it, and here's what we would suggest. No, it doesn't make sense, and you release the funds and go do the projects we're gonna do. The issue with this, folks, as I said at my presentation, is gonna be at the select board level. Mark pointed out that change is good. It's also bad, depending on who you are and what your mentality is. And the biggest obstacle we're going to have is getting people to understand that this is not the plan. It is an idea. It's a concept. But if we like the concept, then we should explore it before we spend more than $2.25 million on existing issues we have in town when these issues aren't going away. So everything that I've talked to you today, with the exception of the Grand Meadows tennis facility, is on the map. So with that presentation, thoughts, because Rich, you can chime in now. You've been doing great down the board. But that's where I think the biggest issue is going to be, is getting the select board to say, again, I don't want to kill the projects that were approved at the select board meeting. I just like to see them held in abeyance until we figure this out. And I don't think we did that with DPW. We had a study being done, so we held up the funding until the study was completed. And once the study was completed, the funds were released and vehicles were purchased. Good, bad, or indifferent. They were, it was done, and but it gave us time to say this is what we needed. What do you think?
Well, I'm going to go back to my statement at the beginning, saying that all of this should be considered at the same time as looking at the overall capital projects in town, and a prioritization be made as to what gets tackled and when it gets tackled. I would hate to just go into this one direction and not really understand the overview of everything. For instance, and Richard could probably attest to things better than I can. The two buildings that blew up in New York City because of a gas leak, it was because of a 127-year-old gas line that wasn't maintained properly. And Richard knows better than I do the age of what we have for lines in town here that have to be taken care of. So where do you set the priorities, and where do you spend the money? So I would like to see everything be considered at one time and prioritized, and that's something that I don't think we've ever really done.
You know what I really envision is that if their steering committee was appointed, for example, I'd like to take that map that we have at the beginning with all the red circles around them and so forth, and put it there, and then put an overlay of the 4-inch water mains. Put an overlay of X. And, like you used to do it when you were in grade school, the good teachers just added to those overlays to give you a better picture of what it looks like. And that, to your point, that's what I see. That's why I'm saying this isn't my plan. This isn't the way it's got to be done or should be done.
Right.
But it's an idea to say, look, these are on the horizon. How do you fit it in? Because if you're going to do a project, and I'm making something up here, over at the community house, and that's where a 4-inch water main is, and we don't address it, then shame on us. And we did exactly what we did here by not thinking ahead and so forth. I agree 100%, but that's what I see as a map with overlays of saying, here's the existing issues. If there's an outfall drain that's on the horizon to be replaced, and it happens to be right next to Wolf Swamp Fields, and we're going to have construction equipment there, what would it cost to, and that's what I think. If I look at my vision of a steering committee, is having people who are a lot smarter than me looking at this, saying, well, what happens if you put it, I can take that piece of land and twist it 18 different ways and max it out. But, and Rich does know, because he's done the presentation for $300 million worth of needs, that this is some of that, but it's not the majority of it.
Well, I think Mark brought up some excellent points, and this is just one more outing of this program, and you've received 3 or 4 points that may not have even been considered before that he's brought to light, and that's what you're hoping to do, is get this out for public view. But his point about the holistic approach, it's appropriate, and we are slowly growing to that point. More and more data is being brought up and put to the format, but you're right. This is the time when you sit down and say, we've got this, now we're looking at possible revenue source. So this helps us in the long-range plan, but it's a very intricate part of the long-range plan. You're spot on. I mean, we need to bring not just this effort, but 3 or 4 efforts together at one time and start to solve this whole puzzle instead of just going out and repairing one little piece without how it's interconnected to the whole puzzle. I think that's the greatest disconnect we have, Mark, and I think you experienced it when you were on Capitol.
Yeah, absolutely.
That we're not totally connected. We're doing individual pieces, but it's not connected to
We're
the
almost
map.
reactive instead of proactive.
Well, that's my favorite term. It's not almost, Mark. Quite often we're reactive.
Yeah.
And that's problematic for us to go into the next 10, 15 years in our community, because these needs they're growing instead of shrinking.
Right.
And the way I calculate this is that there's the potential that this could pay for $10 million worth of projects without costing the taxpayer money on them. But also those cost savings and income goes on in perpetuity when bonds are paid for. And the point is, these are the needs that we have, not just what I pointed out, but what you've talked to as well. These are the needs. They're not going away. The longer we wait, the more expensive they get. And to your point, change. No one wants to look at the big picture because everybody's afraid. We'll talk about an OPEB liability of, 50 million, 30 million, and we put 100,000 in and we sleep well at night, in the budget for it. And I think what I'm trying to convey to people is we have to change. In my lifetime, this might not all get done. In my lifetime, $300 million of needs are not going to be fixed. Mm-hmm. But if we don't put a plan of attack on it and get our blinders off and say, I want my new tennis courts, or I want my new fields. $35,000 is a Band-Aid for fields up at Wolf Swamp. This is a plan that delivers the best fields that the town could have and has the ability to look at all of the other fields, which we haven't touched on, as to whether or not we need those after this is done.
Yeah. And Paul, another good point to mention, especially to the taxpayers, and they watch our meetings, that compared to 5 years ago, even right now, we are dedicating a lot more resources, or a lot more financial resources, to help our infrastructure. Because as it's become more increasingly evident on our needs, the select board has stepped up to the plate along with finance committee and everybody else and said, you need more money going into that resource. So I think you see significant improvements like the William Street drainage projects and the paving programs take place this year.
Yep.
They didn't happen by accident. People are starting to really get programmatic. The old expression, we need a paradigm shift, is a well-used term, but it is true. I mean, we need to start viewing this town in a holistic fashion, and that involves looking deeply into the future, not just 5 years, 10, 15 years out, and say, what's the anticipated needs of our community? And this is brave. Takes brave steps. This is not easy things, and you're right. It takes breaking a lot of eggs to make an omelet, and people don't like change, so it's going to have to work slowly. But I think we're seeing other energies take place, being pushed by the select board in different committees that are starting in the right direction. There is a shift taking place in how we're doing business.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to the old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Right. Yep.
And not to be overwhelmed by the overall cost of doing everything, but coming up with a plan as to how to fit it in financially so it isn't horribly burdened. Well, I don't want to say things are already burdensome for people in town, but to double that or to triple that, it would be horrific.
No, and that's been brought up before a few times. How to eat the elephant one bite at a time, and it's one project at a time. It is and it isn't. It is, because we'll take it, and we just voted for projects at our select board meeting, and there were 4 drainage projects on the agenda. We voted for all 4. We're all 4, and they were ranked in order. And my point is that, I think there was a comment by the town manager that said, how do you get to $300 million? It's $200,000 at a time. It is if you have a plan. And that's what the difference is. We don't even have an elephant.
That's right.
That's the problem. We haven't bagged our elephant yet, because we're taking the little pieces here and there, and we're prioritizing something based on what we could fit in there, for example, as opposed to what really is I don't know if those were the 4 most important things in infrastructure in the town. They might have been the 4 most important drainage projects, but were they more important than the North Interceptor sewer line, for example? That I don't know, because that hasn't been presented. Is it more important than converting a building or tennis courts? Is a North Interceptor, which takes our sewage to Bondi Islands, more important than tennis courts in town? No, not until they break. And
Right.
then they're highly important, especially depending on what side of town you live on.
Right.
So that's the part that the courage is saying to people. Wait a minute, the blink courts are important. They are. They're a part of our community, but the North Interceptor is more important. So my point is, this plan is part of the elephant, and it's not. And I'm not. There's no pat on the back about developing it. It just things clicked. But the bottom line is, we're not even taking our bites because we don't even know where the elephant is.
Right.
And that's where I want to get to. And that's why I think a steering committee takes a look at that, like I said, with the overlays of all that stuff and say, wait a minute, this is we should do X. And it might be completely upside down from what I looked at. And that's okay. I don't own this. This is just a thought to get smarter people to think about it. But I think we need to get to that step of having a steering committee and saying, hold up on $250,000 or $2.25 million worth of projects until we can see whether this works or not. But what we have is the mentality still of, I want mine done today.
Now, in addition to the 2.5, I didn't watch the budget presentation, but of the
No?
2.5, sorry, but of the 2.5 million dollars that you're talking about, there are other capital projects that are involved in addition to that. How much?
yeah.
How much is that?
There's probably about $4 million worth of projects in
In
total.
addition to?
No, in total. I
In
think
total?
because
Yeah.
the drainage projects alone were
Yeah, close to
$945.
$1 million. And then there's
Um,
also a tip project that's funded in there for close to $1 million too.
Right.
But that's from external sources.
So when you're talking about holding, just standing back a little bit on the $2.5 million, that's not negating other capital projects.
No, not
that
at
are-
all.
That are coming
No.
through. I just want that to
No,
be
that's not
clear.
negating DPW trucks or other items that we had. It's just saying on the pieces that we're looking at here, if
Right.
there's anything attached to it, just hold up. If it's not feasible, I get it, then you release it. And, if you think about it, Mark, if the Blinn tennis courts get approved at town meeting, they got to wait till tennis season's over, in the sense of at least the high school. So that's the end of June, maybe. I don't know if there's any big tournaments planned, for the summer. So maybe they start the construction in summer, late fall. And I don't know how long it's going to take. I know there was a quick note on it. If you say, okay, if you held up on it, maybe you didn't get it until the next year. It's not going to stop tennis from being played out there. We just heard on Monday night, one of the park commissioners said he closed down one court because it was in such bad shape. That was the first time we heard of it, that there was actually a court closed. But there's still 11 more to be played on. And I don't know, I intend to walk around out there once everything melts, but to see what the courts look like. But I know that I walked out there 2 years ago, there was a nice crack in one of them, and we still played on them, and no one said a word about it. So I just think that if we, again, look at what we need to do and just say, hold up, don't unfund them, don't stop them, just hold them in abeyance to see if this makes sense. And all I'm looking for is people to let the select board know, to say, yes, it makes sense to look at something like this. That's all I want people to react to. I don't want, because this is saying there'd be 14 more acres for youth sports fields. But that doesn't mean we might not use a youth sport field going down the road, another one, and you utilize that for something else. Mm-hmm. So I really want the residents and the taxpayers to let the select board know this is something we should look at. Because I think that if we don't do this, we're going to be in the same position 30 years from now.
Absolutely.
Except the number's not 300 million,
Right.
it's 600 million, or whatever it is. And we, the board, have got to take the step back and find out, checking, the intestinal fortitude, so to speak, and see if you have it to stand up. There's only one person on for reelection this year, so that might make it easier for the other four to take a stand. But I really think it's something that we at least have to look at.
Okay. The one point I'd like to just come back on, Paul, you mentioned about the drainage projects this year, and you're correct. They were the 4 top priority drainage projects that have been identified so far through our studies. But further along the point of what Paul was saying, at this point, we need to migrate to the point where we can look at the town manager and said, what is the number one project in our entire community? Now, all of the roads and drainage systems and structures all make up their own priorities, and they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but there has to be a number one. And when we start ensuring that that's the project that has our focus and attention, we're starting in the right direction. And I think we're moving towards that. And I honestly believe I've seen improvements in the way we're thinking in the design work, the presentations you were getting on drainage projects. These are well thought out now, and these have been studied, and they're no longer pet projects. These are the number 1, 2, 3, and 4 needs that we have identified right now in our community for drainage improvements. And unfortunately, they're underground, so people can't see them until they fail. And then it's an emergency. So this is starting to get into the into the programmatic and instead of reactive, starting to be proactive on going in and repairing these things before they create havoc in our community.
Yep.
So I think there is improvement, but we've got as the old expression, we've got a long way to go.
Yeah. Anything else before we close out the show?
No, sir.
No. Mark is on the audit committee now, so we expect a lot of audits going on because that's just what you do. But I want to thank Mark and Richard for being here today. Folks, if you have any questions, I have an email at longmeadow.org. It's psantonello@longmeadow.org. Send questions in. My number's in the book. Give me a phone call. I hope you understand that this is just an idea. It is not the plan that has to be adopted. And I would just ask that if you think it's something we should look at, make sure the select board knows. Thank you for watching The Upside. Have a great day.